The slap landed like a gunshot. 1 second the cafe was full of quiet clinking and low conversation. The next, every sound stopped, and the only thing left in the room was the ringing echo of skin against skin. He stood there with his jaw turned 3 inches to the left, a thin line of blood at the corner of his mouth, and his hands stayed at his sides, open, empty, still. Somewhere behind him, a little girl in a yellow raincoat had gone completely silent, her small fingers wrapped around the hem of his jacket. The woman who had hit him was already stepping back, straightening the cuff of her cream blazer as if the whole encounter had left a smudge on it. Diane Ashcroft did not raise her voice when she was angry. She lowered it. And right now it was low enough that the barista at the espresso machine had frozen mid-pour, milk foam sliding over the lip of a cup nobody would ever drink. Nobody in the cafe noticed the scar. It ran along the underside of Wade's forearm, pale and old, shaped like a question mark that someone had tried very hard to straighten out. Diane's bodyguard noticed it. He always noticed things like that. He stood near the door in a dark suit that fit too well for a man who was supposed to be invisible. And when his eyes caught that scar, something in his own face changed, just slightly, the way a man's face changes when he hears a song from a war he thought he'd left behind. She did not know that. She did not know a lot of things. She did not know that the mechanic she had just backhanded in front of his own daughter had once carried a wounded corporal for 6 miles through a mountain pass with 2 cracked ribs and no working radio. She did not know that 4 different governments still kept a folder with his name in it, updated and unread. She did not know that the last time a man had raised a hand to him with real intent, that man had woken up in a field hospital wondering how he'd gotten there. She did not know that the reason Wade Kessler hadn't so much as flinched at the slap was not weakness. It was training. It was 15 years of learning exactly how much a person could take before they had to decide what kind of man they wanted to be on the other side of it. If you've ever been made to feel small in a room full of people who mattered more than you did, if you've ever swallowed something unfair because the alternative would have cost you more than your pride, this story is for you. Stay with us until the end, because what happens to Diane Ashcroft in the next few weeks will restore something in you that you didn't know you'd lost. But before we get to that, let's go back. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or your country in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, back to Wade. 6 weeks earlier, Wade Kessler woke up at 6:15 in the morning, same as he had every morning for the last 4 years, in a house that was too quiet in the places his wife used to fill with noise. He lay there for a moment, listening to the pipes groan awake in the walls, and then he got up, because the day did not wait for grief, and neither did his daughter. Nora was 7 years old, all elbows and questions, and she was already awake when he came down the hall, sitting up in bed with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, staring at the ceiling like it owed her an answer. "Dad," she said, the second she saw him in the doorway, "do you think Mom can see the rain from where she is?" Wade leaned against the doorframe. He had learned over 4 years that these questions came without warning, the way weather did, and that the wrong answer could ruin a morning, and the right one could carry her through a whole day. "I think," he said slowly, "that wherever she is, she's got a better view than we do." Nora seemed to accept that. She always did, eventually. She had her mother's stubborn chin, and her mother's habit of asking exactly the question a person least wanted to answer, and some mornings looking at her felt like looking at a photograph that had learned to talk. He made her oatmeal with too much cinnamon, because that was how she liked it, and while she ate, he stood at the kitchen window and watched the frost melt off the hood of his truck. The truck had 191,000 miles on it, and a check engine light that came on when it felt like it, which was often, and no amount of tinkering seemed to bother it into staying off for good. He didn't mind. A man who had spent a decade and a half depending on machines that had to work or people died, tended to develop a certain patience with the ones that only meant he'd be a few minutes late. Wade ran a small garage on the edge of town, 3 bays and a gravel lot, a business he'd built up slow and careful in the years since he came home for good. He was good with his hands in the specific, unglamorous way that comes from having once depended on his hands for things far more serious than a transmission. Customers liked him because he told them the truth about their cars, charged fair, and never tried to sell them something they didn't need. They also noticed things about him without quite being able to name what those things were. He always parked so his truck faced the exit. He sat with his back to a wall in any restaurant that had one. He noticed the door before he noticed the menu. None of it was dramatic. It was just habit, worn so deep into him that he no longer thought about it, the way another man might not think about which hand held his fork. He'd been a soldier once, a long time ago it felt like now, though the calendar said otherwise. 3 tours. Most of it work he still couldn't discuss over dinner. Some of it work he tried not to discuss with himself. He'd served with the 3rd Special Forces Group, the kind of assignment that came with more silence than medals, though there had been a few of those too, folded now in a drawer under a stack of Nora's old-school drawings, because a drawer was a better home for a medal than a wall. He didn't call himself a hero. He called himself lucky, and then he called himself tired, and most days that was the whole conversation he had with himself about that part of his life. His wife, Ellen, had been the one who convinced him to open the garage instead of taking a security contract overseas that would have paid triple. "I didn't marry a paycheck," she'd told him, 3 months pregnant, and furious and right, the way she so often was. "I married a man who's supposed to come home. He'd come home, and then, 4 years ago, it was Ellen who didn't." A defect in her heart nobody had caught in time, gone in a hospital hallway on a Tuesday afternoon while Wade held a hand that had already stopped holding back. He had survived firefights in 3 countries. Nothing in any of them had prepared him for that hallway. So he raised Nora on his own, and he fixed cars, and he kept his back to the wall, and on the 2nd Thursday of every month he took her for hot chocolate at a fancy cafe downtown, because Ellen used to take her there, back when Nora was too small to remember it herself. And Wade wanted her to have at least one ritual that predated the 2 of them being alone together. The cafe was called the Gilded Cup, all marble counters and brass fixtures, the kind of place that charged $8 for something that cost 40 cents to make and justified it. He went because Nora loved it, because she liked the little dog biscuits shaped like macarons that they gave out for free, because some tiny piece of her mother lived in that room, and he wasn't in the business of taking things away from his daughter. That particular Thursday, the cafe was busier than usual. A woman at a corner table was on a call that seemed to matter enormously to her, sharp voice, clipped words, the particular cruelty of someone used to being obeyed. Wade noticed her the way he noticed most rooms, a quick assessment and then a dismissal, filing her under not my concern, and turning his attention back to Nora, who was explaining in exhaustive 7-year-old detail why her stuffed rabbit needed his own hot chocolate. The woman was Diane Ashcroft, and everyone in the business world knew her name, the way people know the name of a storm that's already made landfall twice. She ran Ashcroft Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in buying struggling companies and making them profitable again, a process that, from the outside, looked a great deal like taking something wounded and finishing the job. She was 36 years old, immaculate in a cream pantsuit that had never once touched a dry cleaner's rack without an appointment, and she had built her entire adult life around the principle that softness was a tax other people paid. She ended her call badly. Whatever news she'd gotten, it hadn't been the news she wanted, and when the barista, a college kid named Bria working her way through a nursing degree one shift at a time, approached to ask if she needed anything else, Diane's frustration found its first target. "This is cold," Diane said, holding up a cup she hadn't touched in 11 minutes. "Do you people not understand what a temperature is?" "I can remake it," Bria said, already reaching for the cup, her voice carrying the practiced patience of someone who needed this job more than she needed to defend it. "I don't want it remade. I want to know why I'm paying premium prices for a place that can't manage basic competence." Diane's voice hadn't risen. Not exactly, but it had sharpened, the way a knife sharpens without getting louder, and 3 tables away Nora looked up from her rabbit, sensing the way children do that something in the room had gone wrong. Wade watched this the way he watched most things, quietly, without comment, filing it under a category of behavior he had no respect for, but also no jurisdiction over. It wasn't his cafe, it wasn't his fight. He turned back to his daughter, who was now watching the woman in the cream suit with wide, uncertain eyes, and he reached over and gently turned her chair a few degrees, back toward him, back toward the hot chocolate and the rabbit and the ordinary safety of their Thursday. That small motion was what did it. Diane's eyes cut across the room and landed on Wade. On the movement, on a man in a flannel shirt, with oil under his fingernails, daring to shield his child from her the way you'd shield a child from weather. "Something to say?" she asked, loud enough now that half the cafe turned. "No, ma'am," Wade said. He kept his voice level. He had learned, a long time ago, in rooms far more dangerous than this one, that the loudest voice in an argument had usually already lost it. "Just having hot chocolate with my daughter. Then stop staring." "I wasn't staring at you," Wade said. And it was true, and it might have ended there if Diane Ashcroft had been having a better day. If the call she just ended had gone differently, if any one of a dozen small mercies had landed in her favor instead of against it. But none of them had, and something about the calm in his voice, the sheer unbothered steadiness of it, seemed to strike her as an insult all its own. "You people," she said, standing now, "always have an opinion, don't you?" Always some quiet little judgment behind the eyes. She gestured at his shirt, his hands, the general economy of him. "Sitting there in your flannel, feeling superior, like the rest of us haven't earned what we have." "I don't feel superior to anybody," Wade said. "I just want my daughter to finish her hot chocolate." "Your daughter," Diane repeated, and something ugly moved behind her eyes. The specific ugliness of a person who has found a soft place to press exactly because it's soft. Does your daughter know her father can't afford a haircut? Does she know you probably drove here in something held together with tape? Nora's face crumpled. Not because she understood the insult in its adult particulars, but because she understood tone the way all children do, and the tone in that room had turned into something aimed at her father. And that was when Diane crossed the last line. She stepped closer, close enough that Wade could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold, and she said, low and precise, "People like you shouldn't be allowed in places like this." And then her hand moved before anyone, including her, seemed fully prepared for it. Wade's head turned with the force of it. He tasted copper. He heard from very far away his daughter say, "Daddy," in a voice that had gone thin with fear, and every instinct that 15 years of training had built into him, instincts that had put men on the ground in under 2 seconds in places whose names never made the news, stood up inside him and waited for a command that never came. He did not give it. He straightened his neck. He looked at Diane Ashcroft with an expression that had nothing behind it that she could use. No anger for her to escalate against, no fear for her to enjoy. Nothing but a terrible, patient calm. And he said, "Excuse me, you should sit down," he said again. "Before you say something you'll spend a long time trying to take back." Someone in the cafe had their phone out now, filming the way someone always does. The barista, Priya, had gone pale behind the counter. And near the door, the man in the dark suit who worked for Diane Ashcroft, a broad-shouldered ex-military man named Gil Torrance, had gone very, very still, his eyes locked, not on his employer's tantrum, but on the scar running up the underside of Wade Kessler's forearm, exposed now where his sleeve had ridden up. Gil had seen scars like that before. Not the shape exactly, but the story the shape told. A through and through, stitched fast and rough in the field because there hadn't been time to do it pretty. The kind of scar that only came from the kind of unit that trained you to keep moving after you'd been shot. He'd carried one like it himself, on his hip, from a deployment he didn't talk about at dinner parties either. And more than the scar, it was the way the man was standing. Weight balanced, shoulders loose, hands open and visible, body angled just enough to keep the child behind him without looking like he was doing it on purpose. That wasn't a mechanic's instinct. That was muscle memory built somewhere very far from a garage, ma'am, Gil said quietly, stepping forward. "I think we should go." "I haven't finished," Diane snapped, not even looking at him. Gil said again with a weight in his voice that made 2 other patrons glance up. "I really think we should go." But Diane Ashcroft did not go. She had spent her whole career learning that the last word in any room belonged to whoever refused to leave it, and she was not about to hand that away to a man in a flannel shirt in front of a room full of witnesses. "Get his information," she told Gil, not breaking eye contact with Wade. "I want to know exactly who thinks he can lecture me in public. I want him to understand precisely what happens to people who embarrass me." "Ashcroft," someone murmured from a nearby table, the name landing the way. Names like that always did, with a little intake of breath, a little recalibration of the room's temperature. Wade knelt down in front of his daughter instead of answering. Nora's cheeks were wet. Her rabbit clutched so tight its ears had gone flat, and he wiped her face with his thumb, gentle, unhurried, as if the woman standing 4 feet away with murder in her voice. "It's okay, Bug," he said. "We're going to finish our hot chocolate, and then we're going to go home." "She hit you," Nora whispered. "I know. Aren't you going to do something?" Wade looked at his daughter for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives a child when he's deciding how much of the truth she can carry. "I already did something," he said. It didn't feel like an answer to a 7-year-old, and it didn't feel like enough of one to Wade either, not in that moment, with his jaw throbbing and the whole cafe staring and Diane Ashcroft still standing over them like she was waiting for a bow. But it was the truth, and it was the only kind of truth he had ever known how to give his daughter, and so he gave it to her anyway. Diane, for her part, was not finished escalating. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number with sharp, precise taps. "This is Diane Ashcroft," she said into it. "I want the manager of this location terminated within the hour for allowing a customer to harass me. And I want it documented that a man matching this description was removed from the premises for creating a disturbance." "Ma'am, he didn't." Priya started and stopped when Diane's eyes swung toward her. "Did I ask you?" "Ma'am," Gil tried again, lower this time, almost a warning. "You might want to think about how this looks." "How this looks," Diane repeated, laughing without any humor in it at all, "is exactly how I want it to look. I want it clear that there are consequences for people who think they can speak to me however they like, in whatever thrift store outfit they woke up in this morning." She was still talking when the cafe manager arrived, a nervous young man named Colton, who had clearly been told more than once that Ashcroft Holdings business accounts were the kind of thing a small cafe chain built its whole quarter around, and who therefore approached the confrontation with the enthusiasm of a man walking into traffic. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. Is there anything I can remove him?" Diane said, pointing at Wade without looking at him. "And the child, I want them out of my sight." "Ma'am, he's a paying customer. He hasn't done anything wrong. Do you want to keep our account or not?" Colton looked, for one long, miserable second, at Wade, at the small crying girl in the yellow raincoat, at the security footage camera blinking its steady red light in the corner, and then he looked away, because he was 24 years old and his manager had told him that morning that the Ashcroft account alone kept 2 of their 3 locations solvent. And courage, it turned out, was a great deal easier to admire in other people than to locate in yourself when your job was on the line. "Sir," Colton said to Wade, his voice thick with apology he didn't have the spine to act on, "I'm going to need you to finish up and head out." Wade didn't argue. He packed Nora's rabbit into her backpack, took her small hand in his, and walked toward the door with the particular dignity of a man who understood that the room's judgment of him mattered a great deal less than his own. At the door, Gil Torrance caught his eye, just for a second, just long enough to say something that didn't need words. One man who had bled somewhere far away, recognizing another. Wade nodded back, small, almost nothing, and then he was gone out into the gray afternoon with his daughter's hand in his and a bruise already forming along his jaw. Nobody in that cafe, watching him go, understood what they had just watched leave the building. She did not know that the man she had just had escorted out like a stray dog had once been offered a position training the very security details that protected men and women exactly like her, and had turned it down because the money wasn't worth what the work would have cost his daughter in missed bedtimes. She did not know that 3 separate governments had, at various points, wanted to give him medals he refused to accept in public ceremonies, because a public ceremony meant a photograph. She did not know that the calm she had mistaken for weakness was the single most dangerous quality a person could possess, because a man who has already decided what he will and will not do no longer needs to prove anything to anyone in the room. She would learn. Not that day, but soon. The video hit the internet 9 hours later. Someone in the cafe, the same person who'd had their phone out during the slap, posted a 14-second clip with the caption, "CEO loses it on random dad at Café, has him and his kid drown out." It got 4,000 views in the first hour. It got 40,000 by midnight. By the following morning, it had crossed 1 million, because the internet has an old reliable appetite for footage of the powerful behaving badly toward the powerless, and this clip had all the ingredients: a designer suit, a crying child, a slap so clean you could hear it land. Ashcroft Holdings' communications team woke up to a crisis that had already outrun them. Diane's assistant, a sharp and exhausted woman named Priscilla Wayne, who had spent 3 years absorbing the fallout of her boss's temper, called her at 6 in the morning with the words, "It's everywhere," before Diane had even had her coffee. "It's a nothing story," Diane said, scrolling through the comments with the particular fury of someone realizing the world was, for once, not going to let her win an argument by simply outlasting it. "He'll fade in a day. These things always fade." "He's not fading," Priscilla said. "Someone found his name. Wade Kessler. He runs a garage. There are already 3 articles about it." The internet loves a sad story until the next one comes along. But this one did not fade, because 2 days later a second clip surfaced. Security footage from the cafe itself, subpoenaed by nobody, simply leaked by someone at corporate who had grown tired of watching Colton take the fall for a decision that had never been his. It showed the whole exchange from a wider angle, including the moment Diane Ashcroft had grabbed the barista's wrist hard enough to bruise it 2 weeks earlier. A detail that turned out to be the first of several such videos that began surfacing from other places she had visited in her long tour. Unchecked career of being the most important person in every room she entered. Ashcroft Holdings board began fielding calls. 3 of the firm's largest institutional investors, the kind of pension funds and endowments that valued their reputations more than a single fund manager's quarterly returns, quietly asked for meetings. A journalist named Renata Fields, who had covered corporate malfeasance for 11 years and had a nose for stories that were about to become bigger stories, filed a records request for Ashcroft HR complaints going back a decade. Carefully managed for years by expensive lawyers and generous severance packages of a woman who mistook cruelty for leadership and had never once been asked to answer for it. And then General Marsh Doyle. He was retired now, 71 years old, living a quiet life 2 states away that mostly involved golf he was bad at and grandchildren he adored. But he still kept in touch with the kind of men who had once served under his command. Because a man doesn't spend 30 years leading soldiers into the worst places on earth and simply stop caring what happens to them afterward. His daughter had sent him the video with the caption, "Isn't this the guy from your old unit reunion photos?" And General Doyle had watched it twice, then a 3rd time, freezing the frame on the moment Wade turned his head after the slap, and he had gone very quiet at his kitchen table. He had seen it before, in places with names that didn't appear on maps, on a much younger face that had since grown a beard and some gray at the temples, but had never lost that particular quality. A man who had already made peace with what he was capable of, and had decided every single day since not to use it. General Doyle made 2 phone calls that morning. The first was to a journalist he trusted. The second was to Wade Kessler himself, a number he still had from 15 years ago, half expecting it to be disconnected. It wasn't. "Sergeant Kessler," the general said, when Wade picked up, and Wade's hand had gone very still on the receiver because nobody had called him that in a long time, and hearing it again felt like a door opening onto a hallway he'd spent years trying to seal shut for his daughter's sake. "General," Wade said, "it's been a while." "I saw the video." Wade closed his eyes. "It's not a big deal, sir. I don't want it to be a big deal." "Son," General Doyle said, in the particular tone of a man who has spent 30 years being obeyed and has no intention of losing this argument. "With respect, it stopped being your decision the moment a million people watched a woman backhand a silver star. I'm going to say some things publicly. I wanted you to hear it from me first, not read it somewhere." Wade didn't ask him not to. Some old, tired part of him wanted nothing more than to disappear back into the quiet of his garage and let the whole thing dissolve into the churn of the internet's short attention. But he thought about Nora's face in that cafe, the confusion and fear in it, and about Priya, the barista, who had done nothing but pour a cold coffee and gotten yelled at for it, and about Colton, the manager who was probably losing sleep over a decision he'd been forced into by a company that valued one account more than its own employees' dignity. And he found that some things were bigger than his own preference for invisibility. "Say what you need to say, sir," Wade said finally. "Just leave the medals out of it if you can. That's not what this is about." "I'll do my best," the general said, in a voice that suggested he would try and largely fail, because some truths, once they start moving, choose their own speed. The general's statement, released 2 days later through the journalist Renata Fields, went far beyond confirming that Wade Kessler had served. In careful, restrained language cleared through the appropriate channels, it detailed that Sergeant First Class Wade Kessler had spent 9 years with 3rd Special Forces Group, that he had been awarded the Silver Star for an extraction under fire that had saved 4 members of his team in a valley whose name still wasn't public. And that, in General Doyle's 31 years of commanding soldiers, he had never met a man with a steadier temperament under provocation. The woman in that video, the statement read, in its final line, the one that every outlet would end up quoting, was not lucky that he chose to walk away. She was protected by it. The consequences arrived quickly after that, and they arrived from every direction at once, the way water finds every crack in a dam that has been quietly failing for years. Ashcroft Holdings Board, already unsettled by the leaked security footage and the mounting pattern Renata Fields had documented, called an emergency session. 2 of the firm's largest limited partners withdrew letters of intent for a fund Diane had spent 18 months courting. A luxury retail client who had been on the verge of signing a 10-year lease with an Ashcroft-owned property terminated negotiations, citing reputational alignment concerns, language that meant exactly what it sounded like it meant. The board, faced with a choice between protecting its founder and protecting the firm itself, chose the firm, and Diane Ashcroft was placed on an indefinite leave of absence, pending an independent review of workplace conduct, a phrase that in the business press functioned as a polite funeral announcement. Priscilla Wen, her assistant of 3 years, resigned the same week, and did an interview with Renata Fields that did more damage than the video itself, because it came from someone who had watched the pattern up close for years and had simply run out of reasons to protect it. Diane read all of it alone, in an apartment that had always felt like a hotel room even though she'd owned it for 6 years, and for the first time in a long time, possibly the first time since she'd clawed her way out of a small town, and a father who told her she'd never amount to the men he respected, she did not have an argument ready. She had built her entire identity on being the person in the room who could not be shamed, and now she understood, with a particular clarity that only total professional collapse can provide. That shame did not require her participation. It only required an audience, and the audience had already made up its mind. She thought about calling Wade Kessler to apologize. She drafted the text 4 different times and deleted it 4 different times because every version sounded like a woman trying to manage a crisis rather than a woman who meant it, and some old, buried part of her, the part that had once been a scared girl in a small town who'd promised herself she would never again let anyone make her feel small, recognized the difference and refused to let her send something false. Instead, 3 weeks into her leave of absence, she drove out to the edge of town to a gravel lot with 3 garage bays, and she sat in her car for 20 minutes before she found the nerve to get out. Wade was under a sedan when she arrived, and it was Nora who saw her first, standing at the mouth of the garage in her school uniform, backpack still on, watching the woman from the café approach with the wary stillness of a child who remembered exactly what that woman's voice had sounded like the last time she'd heard it. "Dad?" Nora said, and Wade rolled out from under the car at the tightness in his daughter's voice and saw Diane Ashcroft standing in his gravel lot in jeans and a plain gray sweater. No entourage, no phone in her hand, looking. "I'm not here to make a scene," Diane said before he could speak. "I know I don't have any right to your time. I just needed to say it in person, or I wasn't going to believe I'd actually said it." Wade stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and waited. "I'm sorry," Diane said. "Not the kind of sorry you say to make a story go away. I've said that kind 100 times in my life, and I know exactly what it sounds like, and it doesn't sound like this. I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I said what I said in front of your daughter. I've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out why I did it, and the honest answer is that you didn't flinch. And I've spent my whole life making sure everyone around me flinches, because if they don't, I don't know what I'm worth." She stopped, seemed to hear herself, and looked briefly, genuinely embarrassed. "That's not an excuse. I just don't have anything better than the truth right now." Wade was quiet for a moment. Nora had crept closer, half hidden behind his leg, watching this woman with an expression that had shifted from fear into something more complicated, the particular curiosity children have toward adults who are clearly struggling. "I appreciate you coming out here," Wade said finally. "Took something." "Are you going to sue?" Diane asked. "My lawyers keep asking. I told them I didn't care what you did." "I'm not going to sue you," Wade said, and something in Diane's shoulders came down half an inch, though whether it was relief or simple exhaustion, Wade couldn't tell. "I don't want your money. I wanted you to sit down and stop scaring my kid, and you didn't, and now you're standing in my garage lot telling me you're sorry, so I guess we're further along than we were." "That's it?" Diane asked. "No condition, no demand?" "What would I ask for?" Wade said. "An apology. I already got a public statement. So, a million strangers can feel like justice happened. I don't need a million strangers to feel anything. I need my daughter to feel safe drinking hot chocolate downtown, and honestly, the internet already did more to that account than I ever could have. Without me lifting a finger, I didn't ask for any of it. I just want to go back to fixing cars." Diane looked at him for a long moment, something working behind her eyes that looked almost like grief, though grief for what exactly, Wade couldn't have said. Some version of herself she'd have to bury, now that the easy one had died in a cafe in front of witnesses. "Why didn't you fight back?" she asked. In the cafe, Gil told me, after he told me what you were, what you could have done. Her voice had dropped, some of its old sharpness sanded down into something closer to genuine bewilderment. You could have ended that in about 4 seconds. He said so, and you just stood there and let me hit you. Wade considered the question, the real weight of it, the way he considered most things, slowly, without performance. There's a difference between what you're capable of and what you're willing to do, he said. I spent a long time in places where the line between those two things was the only thing that separated me from the people I was fighting. You learn to protect that line like it's the last thing you own, because eventually it's the only thing you do own. If I'd put my hands on you in that cafe, that's not a trade I make, not for you, not for anybody. Nora, from behind his leg, chose that particular moment to speak the way children do, without any sense of the gravity in the air around them. My dad says being strong isn't about what you do, she said to Diane. Matter of fact, still half hidden, but no longer afraid. It's about what you don't do, even when you really, really want to. Diane looked down at her, and something in her face broke open, quietly, privately, the way a thing breaks when nobody is around to perform the breaking for. That's a very smart thing to know, she told Nora. I didn't know that until a few weeks ago, and I'm a lot older than you. It's okay, Nora said. You can learn it now. Dad says it's never too late unless you're already dead, and even then, he's not totally sure. That got out of Diane Ashcroft. Something that might have been the first real laugh she'd had in a month, cracked and startled out of her before she could stop it. And Wade found himself almost smiling too, despite everything. Because his daughter had just delivered better wisdom in 9 seconds than most of Diane's board members had managed in a decade of quarterly meetings. I don't expect you to forgive me, Diane said, gathering herself again. I just wanted you to know that I heard it. All of it. I already forgave you, Wade said. That part's not hard. Forgiving somebody doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean I owe you my trust. It just means I'm not going to carry what you did around with me like it's mine to keep. It was never mine. It was yours. You can have it back. Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned to go, and got about 10 feet before she stopped and turned back the barista. She said, Priya, I had her manager fired the same day over nothing, because I wanted an audience for my temper. I've already had it reversed, full back pay, and I've set up a scholarship fund for her nursing program, in her name, not mine. I'm not telling you that, so you'll think better of me. I'm telling you because I think you're the only person who'll believe I mean it. Wade nodded slowly. That's a start, he said. It doesn't erase it. But it's a start. I know, Diane said. I'm learning to be all right with starts. She got back in her car, and Wade watched her go, gravel crunching under the tires, and Nora tugged on his sleeve. Is she going to be okay? Nora asked, with the uncomplicated concern of a child who had already forgiven a stranger faster than most adults manage in a lifetime. I think so, Bug, Wade said. I think she's going to spend a long time figuring out how to be a different kind of person than the one everybody's used to. That's harder than it sounds. But I think she's going to try. 6 months passed away, months do quietly, in the accumulation of small, ordinary days. Wade's garage picked up new business from people who had seen the story and wanted, in whatever small way they could manage, to support a man who had handled an impossible moment with more grace than anyone had a right to expect. He didn't advertise it. He didn't need to. He just kept fixing cars and picking Nora up from school and making oatmeal with too much cinnamon, and the quiet went on being quiet, which was exactly how he liked it. Diane Ashcroft did not return to Ashcroft Holdings. The Independent Review found what Renata Fields had already documented, a decade-long pattern that the board could no longer justify protecting, and she resigned rather than be removed, a distinction that mattered to almost nobody but herself. She spent the first several months afterward in a kind of professional wilderness, the particular disorientation of a person who had built her entire sense of worth around being indispensable and had just discovered, all at once, that the machine ran fine without her. She started small. She funded Priya's scholarship in full, and then, months later, funded 4 more like it, quietly, without her name attached, because some habits are worth building even when nobody's watching to give you credit for them. She sat on a nonprofit board focused on workplace protections for hourly employees, not for the cameras, since there were none, but because it turned out to be the first work she'd done in 15 years that didn't require her to be feared to be effective. She wrote Wade a letter once, by hand, not asking for anything, just telling him that the version of herself she was building now was slower and smaller, and for the first time she could remember something she didn't have to defend. He kept the letter. He didn't answer it. Some things don't need an answer to matter. On the second Thursday of a spring month, Wade took Nora back to the Gilded Cup for hot chocolate, and this time there was no scene, no slap, no ringing silence, just a father and his daughter at a corner table, the free dog biscuit macarons. Priya was still behind the counter, now saving for her second year of nursing school, and she brought their order over herself, refusing to let anyone else carry it. "On the house," she said, "always for you two." Nora looked up at her father as they sat there, stirring the whipped cream into her cocoa, with the serious concentration only a 7-year-old can bring to a task that matters to no one but her. "Dad," she said, "do you think Mom would be proud of you?" Wade considered the question the way he considered most things his daughter asked him, slowly, honestly, without the easy answer. "I think," he said, "your mom would tell me I did about as good as anybody could have done, and then she'd tell me not to get a big head about it, because that's exactly the kind of thing she'd say." Nora smiled into her cup, satisfied, and went back to stirring, and the two of them sat there for a while in the particular peace of two people who had weathered something together and come out the other side still holding hands. If there is one thing this story asks you to carry with you, let it be this: the world will always reward the loudest person in the room, at least for a little while, right up until the moment it doesn't. It will hand power to people who mistake cruelty for strength, and, for a time, it will look like they were right to bet on it. But watch what happens to the quiet ones, the ones who absorb the unfair thing, who choose, again and again, not to become the thing that hurt them. That restraint is not weakness. It is the most expensive decision a person can make, because it costs something every single time, and they pay it anyway, because somewhere down the line they decided that being right mattered less than being good. You will be humiliated in this life. Everyone is, eventually, by someone who has more power than they've earned the right to hold. And in that moment, you will have a choice that has nothing to do with what you're capable of and everything to do with who you intend to be on the other side of it, Choose the version of yourself you can still respect in the morning. Choose it even when nobody's filming. Choose it even when the room is against you, because rooms change their minds, and reputations built on cruelty have a way of collecting their bill all at once, in public, at the worst possible time for the person who owes it. Dignity is not loud. It never has been. It is a man standing still in a cafe with his daughter's hand in his, absorbing something unfair because the alternative would have cost him more than his pride. And it is a woman, months later, learning slowly and privately, grace is not the absence of power. It is power entirely intact, choosing every day not to use itself as a weapon. So here's the question I'll leave you with tonight. If you were in that cafe, if you'd watched a stranger get humiliated in front of his child and done nothing but stare, what would it take for you to finally stand up? And if you were the one on the receiving end of it, would you have the strength Wade had to let the moment pass without letting it own you? I read every one of them, and some nights they're the only thing that reminds me why we keep telling these stories. If this one stayed with you, do me a favor and subscribe. There's another family, another quiet act of strength waiting for you right here on this channel. And somewhere out there tonight, someone needs to hear that dignity is worth more than being believed. Share this with them. And I'll see you in the next one. Wah.